Hi, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here with the Ruttenberg Library. Come to you with a Memorial Day weekend book haul. I was able to go on Saturday to the Jesse James Outlet Mall and pick up some books that are primarily dealing with Civil War stuff, or at least Civil War figures in one way or another. And so I wanted to share those with you and let you see what I got, and I'll let you, tell me what you think of what I got. And so anyway, here we go. The first book that I was able to pick up is First Blood, The Story of Fort Sumter by W.A. Swanberg. And so when I picked this up, I told you in previous videos that I have been trying very hard to not only get histories that are all encompassing, but I've been also trying to really get my collection to where I have books on the individual events or individual people that are involved. These events that I talk about in my class with my students, and I just want to learn more about them, more detail about them. And so I was pretty happy when I saw this book on Fort Sumter, because I have no books on Fort Sumter, on just Fort Sumter. This comes from Dorset Press. It's out of New York, and it's originally a 1957 book, but this is a 1990 printing. And so I look forward to that. According to the cover, it was America's bloodiest war. It was the war which changed our country irrevocably. First Blood is the story of the event that precipitated that war. After passing the Ordinance of Secession in December of 1860, South Carolina demanded all federal property in the state, particularly the forts of Charleston Harbor, Fort Sumter, Fort Moultrie, and Castle Pinckney. On December 26, Major Robert Anderson removed his U.S. Army command of about 100 men from Fort Moultrie to Fort Sumter, a stronger defensive site. South Carolina Governor F.W. Pickens had Fort Moultrie and Castle Pinckney seized and demanded Anderson's surrender. Anderson refused. Pickens then placed General P.G.T. Beauregard in command of the arsenal at Charleston and again demanded Anderson's surrender. Again, Anderson refused, and Beauregard then commenced a 34-hour bombardment of the fort, after which Anderson, hopelessly outmanned and outgunned, surrendered. W.A. Swanberg brings home to us the story behind the first battle, the political, social, and military backdrop to an event that set us on a course from which there was no turning back. And so I'm pretty excited about that book. Like I said, I have no books on Fort Sumter, so that's my first, and so I'm hoping that'll be a good read. All right. The next book I was able to pick up is Grant's Final Victory, Ulysses S. Grant's Heroic Last Year by Charles Braslin Flood. And pretty excited about this. Many of you have been probably watching the History Channel 3-part series on Grant. I started that last night. I got it all DVR'd and everything, and I was pretty pumped up to begin with, and then I listened to Peg talk about it, and she got all excited about it too, and I can't wait to listen to her final thoughts on. She said she's going to do a video on Thursday, Friday on her thoughts about the documentary, so I can't wait to listen to that. But as I was sitting there thinking about it, I was like, man, that's the perfect time to get this book. And so anyway, this book is, let's see, from Da Capo Press. It is a 2011 book, and it is out of, let's see, Cambridge, looks like. And if you want to listen to the cover on this one, shortly after losing all of his wealth in a terrible 1884 swindle, Ulysses S. Grant learned he had terminal throat and mouth cancer. Destitute and dying, Grant began to write his memoirs to save his family from financial ruin. In his race against the fatal illness, Grant would work on some days from morning to night, writing 10,000 words in a day, despite suffering increasing pain. The New York Times printed regular coverage of Grant's failing health and the progress of his memoirs, and letters poured in from across the country to express the American people's admiration and support. 20 years after his respectful and generous demeanor shown towards Robert E. Lee at Appomattox, people in both the North and the South came to know Grant as the brave, honest man he was. now using his famous determination in this final effort. He finished his memoirs just 3 days before he died in July of 1885. Published after his death by his friend Mark Twain, Grant's personal memoirs would become an instant bestseller, restoring his family's financial health and, more importantly, helping to cure the nation of the bitter discord that had lingered since the end of the Civil War. To this day, his memoirs are ranked among the best ever written by a former military leader and president. In this masterful narrative, historian Charles Braslin Flood brings to life the dramatic last year of General Grant, a tragic and inspiring story of hope and determination. Yep, and so this will probably be on that documentary. This will be obviously the third episode. That'll be tomorrow night. And anyway, I thought that was a pretty good pickup. I've read another book by Flood, and then I have one on the to-be-read list by Flood. So I kind of like his work, and so I thought that was a good pickup. The next one is, and I've been wanting this book for a long, long time. It's the Gettysburg Gospel, The Lincoln Speech That Nobody Knows by Gabor Borit. And he's a pretty good historian. I have another book that I had gotten that he wrote. This is from 2006, Simon & Schuster, and it's out of New York. And the back part of this says, the words of Abraham Lincoln spoke at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery at Gettysburg comprise perhaps the most famous speech in history. Many books have been written about Gettysburg Address, and yet, as Lincoln scholar Gabor Borit shows, there is much that we don't know about the speech. And in the Gettysburg Gospel, he tears away a century of myths, lies, and legends to give us a clear understanding of the greatest American's greatest speech. In the aftermath of the bloodiest battle ever fought in North America, the little town of Gettysburg was overwhelmed. This was where Lincoln had to come to explain why the horror of war must continue. Borit shows how Lincoln responded to the politics of the time, as well as how and when he wrote the various versions of his remarks. Few people initially recognized the importance of the speech, but over the years it would grow into American scripture, acquiring new and broader meanings. Based on years of scholarship as well as a deep understanding of Lincoln and of Gettysburg itself, the Gettysburg Gospel is an indispensable book for anyone interested in the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, or American history. All right, and so I was pretty excited to pick this book up. I've been wanting it for a while. I have a whole bunch of these Simon & Schuster Lincoln Library books. I have a whole bunch of those. And this has just been on the list for a long time. Being a Lincoln fan, I was pretty excited to pick that up. Here's one. It's A Ruined Land, The End of the Civil War by Michael Goley. And of course, the end of the Civil War, that was a terrible time in American history. But anyway, a little bit about this book from the cover. Ruined Land. As the Civil War drew to a close, its final battles and unsolved issues left a complex legacy of pain. Southern plantation owners, stripped of their land, struggled to find a way to survive amid the shortages and watched the growing changes around them with resentment and fear. Newly freed slaves searched for a way to make a home in a land that had viewed them as chattel. Northern reformers struggled to educate an enormous population of former slaves to prepare them for a new life. In a fascinating approach that allows the voices of those who were there to speak to the reader, gifted writer Michael Goley shows the impact of victory and defeat on the ordinary Americans who both influenced events and were caught up in them. Through careful research coupled with compassion, Goley takes a unique perspective by interweaving personal histories of soldiers and civilians with the larger events of the Civil War. Among the events of this bitter conflict, Goley illuminates the impact of Sherman's march through Georgia and the Carolinas and the brutal conditions of the infamous Confederate prison at Andersonville, the struggle of its inmates to survive and the shock it created throughout the land on its crimes once its crimes were made public. He goes on to describe the despair caused by the assassination of Lincoln, the first bitter weeks of armistice, and the immediate post-war life in a devastated, chaotic South, and the promise of freedom for the African-American slaves. Based in large part on illuminating new material, much of it previously unpublished, Gole uses the letters, diaries, and other literary remains from those who experienced the war. Some of the chief characters whose stories unfold include Oliver Otis Howard, one of Sherman's generals and commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau; Lew Wallace, an amateur soldier, author, and member of the court-martial for the Lincoln conspirators; and the Andersonville commandant Laura Town, a Northern volunteer teacher in the reformist community of the Sea Islands; George Julian, a radical Republican congressman from Indiana and bitter opponent of President Andrew Johnson; Emily LeConte, the teenage daughter of a slaveholding Southern family. And through their experiences and thoughts, we gain a vivid, panoramic look at the effects of a bitter struggle and at the efforts of both sides to work toward a solution to problems whose answers are more elusive. And so I'm pretty excited about this book. Again, a ruined land, the end of the Civil War. And this is from John Wiley & Sons Incorporated out of New York, and it's a 1999 book. And this is just a time period I'd like to learn a little bit more about. When I teach it to my kids, I tend to start running out of time right at the very end of the year, and so Reconstruction usually doesn't get what it should get in my class, not because I don't think it's important, but I just plain old run out of time on it. And so this is going to, I think, get into that time period, that end of the war and into that Reconstruction period. And so I look forward to reading that. And then the last book I was able to pick up is Forge of Empires, 1861 to 1871, Three Revolutionary Statesmen and the World They Made, by Michael Knox Barron. And so I really like this cover, by the way. I thought that was pretty sharp cover. Let's see here. And this is from the Free Press out of New York, and it is a 2007 book. And this one says, three statesmen forged the empires that would dominate the 20th century through 2 world wars, the Cold War, and beyond. Each of the three was a revolutionary, yet each consolidated a nation that differed profoundly from the others in its conceptions of liberty, power, and human destiny. Michael Knox Barron's Forge of Empires brilliantly entwines the stories of the three epochal transformations and their fateful legacies, telling the stories from the point of view of those who participated in the momentous events, among them Walt Whitman and Friedrich Nietzsche, Mary Chestnut and Leo Tolstoy, Napoleon III and the Empress Eugenie. Barron weaves a rich tapestry of high drama and human pathos. Great events often turned on the decision of a few lone souls, and each of the three statesmen faced moments of painful doubt or denial, as well as significant decisions that would redefine their nations. With its vivid narrative and memorable portraiture, Forge of Empires shreds new light on a question of perennial importance. How are free states made, and how are they unmade? In the same decade that saw freedom's victories, one of the trinity of liberators revealed himself as an enemy to the free state, and another lost heart. What Lincoln called the germ of freedom, which was to grow and expand into the universal liberty of mankind, came close to being annihilated in a world crisis that pitted the free state against new philosophies of the terror and coercion. Forge of Empires is a masterly story of one of history's most significant decades, and so that sounded really good because it's going to put the the Civil War and these other events into more of a world perspective. And of course, we think of the Civil War as definitely a domestic issue, but it had world implications. And so I picked that up. I thought it was really good. I spent a little over $17 on the 5 books. I thought I did pretty decent. You guys tell me what you think down in the comments. Did I do okay? Have you read any of these? Tell me what you think of them. And thank you for watching. Have a good day, BookTube.